Welcome to the Contagion podcast, where we spread inspiration one story at a time. I am your host, Holly Jean Jackson. Each episode spotlights and interviews one transformational leader, their stories, and their advice for how you too can lead yourself and others through inspiration. If you are a visionary seeking to uplevel your leadership skills, then this is the podcast for you. I invite you today to spread inspiration like a contagion. Welcome to the Contagion movement. Welcome to episode 35 of the Contagion podcast. Today's episode is also being recorded for YouTube, so if you'd prefer to watch, make sure you look at the show notes for that link. Today's guest is Cynthia Thurlow. Cynthia is a globally recognized expert in nutrition and intermittent fasting, highly sought after speaker, CEO, and founder of Everyday Wellness Project. She's been a nurse practitioner for 20 plus years. She is a 2 times TEDx speaker. Her second talk on intermittent fasting has been viewed nearly 6 million times. She has been featured on ABC, Fox 5, KTLA, CW, and in Medium and Entrepreneur. She's also the host of Everyday Wellness Podcast, which was listed as 20 podcasts that will help you grow in 2020 by Entrepreneur Magazine. For that link, you can also see the show notes. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you. It's so nice to be with you this morning.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Thanks. I always like to start from the beginning. You know, I'm someone that's passionate about health and wellness and was one of those people who was pre-law as an undergrad and got out of undergrad, applied to law school and decided that really wasn't what I wanted to be doing. So I took a deep dive into pre-med classes and ended up in nursing, which was a great alternative to being a physician. And, you know, during my years as an ER nurse in inner city Baltimore, I had so much fun taking care of very acutely sick, medically complex people. Later went on and did a nurse practitioner program and ultimately relocated to the Washington, D.C. area when I got engaged. And that's where I live with my husband and my children and my menagerie of animals. But I think what people are probably most interested in is that, you know, I'm trained as a traditional Western medicine provider. But as I grew weary of writing prescriptions, I started to really scratch the surface and ask myself, you know, what would be more powerful than writing prescriptions? And obviously, here's my caveat of I respect what my Western medicine trained peers are. We absolutely need that option for fighting urgent and emergent and surgical needs. But I do think that there's not enough focus on the nutrition piece. And so that's what I kind of down the rabbit hole I went and really had an opportunity to really examine the role of the foods we choose to eat and our health and wellness. And so I took a pivot from Western medicine 4 years ago, created my own practice. You know, I'm still licensed as a nurse practitioner, but I really focus on food first and a lot of functional diagnostic testing. And through that, I've been able to help more people. And that was always my intention, was using my voice to be able to impact a greater population of individuals. And so I think that I'm definitely on that path, and I find what I'm doing now to be much more rewarding. I always say that being an entrepreneur is both the most wonderful and the most difficult job I've ever had, even more challenging than being a parent. But it's also showing my kids and demonstrating for them that, you know, we don't have to be put into a box. We don't have to be a sheep. We don't have to, you know, live by a bunch of constraints that no longer suit us. And we're designed as humans to evolve, shift, and change. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit more than what you already alluded to, but it gives your listeners a bit of perspective about who I am and, you know, what platform I kind of stand on.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you a follow-up question on that. Was that pivot from Western medicine to really treating the root cause through nutrition, was that difficult? Like, did you receive a lot of criticism or pushback or resistance?
It's a great question. I think when I initially started, because I actually did a functional nutrition program while I was still practicing as a nurse practitioner, and I would say that it was never a lack of support. I think a lot of the physicians and nurses that I work with are and continue to be incredibly proud and supportive that I kind of took this major pivot, but with tremendous curiosity. We're not conditioned to believe as healthcare providers that food is all that important. That's not part of our training. Maybe it is now, but it certainly wasn't over 20 years ago. And so they used to find it humorous that I would want to take the time to talk to our patients about the nutrition piece. And yet I used to remind them that that is the most important focus. It all starts with food. And so, I would say overwhelmingly, it has been very positive. I've very, very rarely encountered a healthcare provider who's not supportive, largely because I think they think of food as being very innocuous, that it doesn't have as much impact. And for that, I'm grateful, because it's allowed me to, develop the confidence and the finesse that I've been able to work with. And I always say I play well with others. That's part of my personality. But with that being said, I do have other peers who have encountered tremendous backlash from within, not just their medical communities, but their nursing communities. And I always say I'm grateful to be one of those that hasn't encountered a whole lot of dissension, thankfully.
Yeah, that's great. So I did want to ask you, what makes you an inspirational leader, or what is your secret sauce?
Hmm. I'm an inspirational leader because I'm not afraid to challenge people. I'm not afraid to break free from conventional wisdom as it pertains, or dogma as it pertains to health and wellness. And I don't think I would have had that voice when I was a younger, newer nurse or nurse practitioner. But I think it was many, many years of just growing increasingly frustrated with the constraints that I saw within the medical system. And so, for many, many reasons, I believe that when you find your voice and when you have the opportunity to inspire others, not just patients, but your own family, your own, team of healthcare providers, your peers that you work with, that's the pivot point. I mean, I feel like I'm leaps and bounds beyond where I was even 10 years ago. And because I have so many healthcare providers, nurses, doctors, and other people who, share with me now, they're like, I love following you because you're encouraging people to take more accountability, not just the patients, but also healthcare providers, to say, listen, we may not have learned this during our training, but we have a responsibility to evolve, shift, and change throughout our lifetimes. We are designed to be lifelong learners. We are not designed to be static, or to not take the opportunity to learn new things. I mean, I think that's absolutely critical. I always tell my children, I'm like, I will be a lifelong learner until I take my last breath. And irrespective of, what life stage I'm in, I think it's really, really critical to inspire other people to, don't keep doing the same old thing if it's not working for you. And considering what we see here in the United States in terms of our escalating obesity rates and diabetes, which is diabetes and obesity, et cetera, we need to change what we're doing because it's not working for us.
Yeah, accountability definitely begins with the individual, and
Hmm.
it's more powerful, and it catches and has more of a ripple effect when you
Hmm.
can work with the medical system and the practitioners to take responsibility, because a lot of individuals aren't even aware of how much that's impacting them, or they might think
Hmm.
it's impacting them to some degree, but not the root cause of perhaps some of their medical problems that they're just getting prescriptions for.
Absolutely. And the whole basis of limiting beliefs is that, people will pigeonhole themselves. They'll say, well, I'm 35, 47, 52, and this is the way things need to be. And so I challenge people and tell them all the time, I'm like, listen, if I bought into limiting beliefs, I wouldn't be who I am. So I encourage people to, make small, subtle changes. Don't buy into the hype. If you're not getting the answers you need, look for them. If you're not working with a practitioner that you agree with, or that you feel like listens to you or is willing to go the extra mile, there are thousands of us out there who are willing to really, work in partnership. And that's really the way things have evolved, I think, in many ways. When I'm working with women, and I work predominantly with women, I always tell them, I'm like, I'm a partner with this. I mean, you tell me, you give me the feedback, and we'll create the roadmap together. It doesn't have to be a one size fits all. That's one of my greatest pain points, is when someone, tries to fit a square, a square peg in a round hole. And like, that doesn't work. We need to find something else. We can't just accept that that doesn't work. There has to be a workaround. So I always, kind of encourage people to imagine, envision what they want their lives to be, and then create the steps to make that happen.
That's an excellent point. I think that for most service industries, that if it's not a partnership, it's not likely to be as successful because there's
Mm-hmm.
not as much buy-in and there's
Mm-hmm.
not as much willingness to take action. And so unless you're hiring somebody to do it, which is impossible for your own
Mm-hmm.
body and lifestyle, it's pretty difficult to make that change. And I think also individuals need to be part of that change and transformation and give you feedback on what they're willing to do and what they're not,
Mm-hmm.
so it's not overwhelming.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. So I also wanted to ask, what does inspiration mean to you?
Mm. I mean, when I think about inspiration, it's a way of encouraging or manifesting or driving a desire to learn more about something or to inquire about something. It's a curiosity. I think that it's something that may not be innate to all of us, but our lives would be so much less than what they could be capable of if we don't have a passion or we don't have a drive towards learning more about something or experiencing something. I think that so many of us, and maybe, given COVID and social distancing, which seems to be, we're going on month 5, here in our area, if that hasn't inspired or encouraged you to look at things differently, I mean, this is a wake up call for so many people. It's like, what's the life you want to lead? What are the things you want to do? I mean, I live in Washington, D.C., and my husband and I had a conversation a couple weeks ago, and I said, our kids are going to be 100% socially distanced learning for at least the short term. They're ninth graders and seventh graders. We could work, they could work, we can work from anywhere, and they can study from anywhere. So let's do something bold and jump off the cliff and move. And so that's something we're actually in the process of doing. So from my perspective, I want to demonstrate for my children, we're not all in a box. Our lives don't have to be static. Let's do something that inspires all of us to live a greater life or to push ourselves beyond our boundaries. Because what's easy for us as individuals is it's very, very easy to keep doing the status quo. Much easier to do that than it is to grow. And sometimes when we force ourselves to grow and, we make decisions or we move or we change career paths or we start a new program or we learn a new instrument. And I'm just giving you examples. It doesn't have to be something grandiose. That's our bodies are designed to be stressed, whether it's a hormetic stressor or it's an intellectual stressor, in small amounts. Those kinds of things are really, really important for growth. And you aren't going to grow by playing small. You're not going to grow by being scared. I'm just a big believer in pushing myself and, encouraging my children and pushing my husband and just saying, life is short. Let's live the most out of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know so many people that are going through major transformations right now. I too am actually moving across
Mm-hmm.
country in 2 months. And a lot of people think that's crazy during a pandemic, but to me, it feels right. So why
Yeah.
not? The
Right.
present moment is always the best moment. And yeah, it's stressful and it's overwhelming at times, but it's the right move. And like, I
Mm-hmm.
love how you said that it's tapping into that drive
Mm-hmm.
and tapping into that purpose and really being clear on what you need at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I just think, these are unprecedented times and trying to make sense of this with, a newly turned 15-year-old and a almost 13-year-old and a lot of togetherness over the last 5 months and no travel for really any of us. I think it has really demonstrated on so many levels. What are your priorities? What do you want to, emphasize in your life? What do you not want to do? Like I actually said to my husband, this is part of our conversation from a few weeks ago. And I said, there's so many things that 5, 10 years ago I thought were important that really aren't. And I'm like, I don't need all this materialistic stuff. I'm like, I could live with 90% less and be completely fulfilled and happy. And so in many ways, I like people to think of the events that have gone on in 2020 as being a blessing of sorts. I know that a lot of people are suffering, and I'm not making light of that at all. But what I do think is important is that through adversity, we are able to tap into intrinsically who we really are as individuals. And that's powerful. Whether or not people realize that, I think for many of us, we've been on coast mode for so long. Our lives get busy, and before we know it, it's 6 months later, 1 year later, 2 years later. And I think the last 5 months have demonstrated for a lot of us, we're like, you know what? That's not working anymore. I don't want that kind of lifestyle. I don't want that kind of pressure. I don't want to feel inauthentic. I don't want to be around people that don't ascribe to the same value system that we have, or the same, kind of mindset, positivity, etc. And so I think that, whether it's physical environment, intellectual environment, emotional environment, I think a lot of people are shifting and making some big decisions for themselves. Much like
Yeah.
you mentioned you're moving across the country. So
Yeah, this period of time has shaken things up for people, and it's causing them to, hopefully stop sleepwalking through life
mhm,
and have that wake
correct.
up moment and do what's right for them. So,
Hmm.
so I also wanted to ask you, how do you define success for yourself, and how did you arrive
Mm.
at that definition?
That's a great question. I think when I was younger, I defined success based on where did I go to college? What kind of grades did I have? What kind of job did I have? Um, what zip code did I live in? That defines success. Whereas now, success on so many levels is so much more deep, because for me, it's, do I live a life authentically? Am I being honest with myself? Do I nurture the relationships that are most important to me? Because much to your point, you can kind of sleepwalk through life. But I think a lot of people, I've been married for 17 years, and my husband and I, we had this conversation, and I just said, are we honoring our relationship? If our relationship is the most important thing, what are we doing every day to honor that? And so, one of the things that we talked about was, what are the things we're going to do every single day? Not just when we have an anniversary, or not just when we have a birthday. What are the small things we're going to do every day to show each other we care about one another? Same thing with my kids, same thing with my very close girlfriends and my, extended family. How can I demonstrate for them? So success for me is much deeper. I think it's an emotional connection. How good are those connections? Am I living a life where I feel fully authentic and honest and virtuous? And am I living with integrity? Because that to me is success now, as opposed to a lot of I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm proud of where I went to college, and I'm proud of, the work that I've done, and by no means that I might dismiss that, but I don't I don't entertain, I don't pay attention to all the materialistic stuff. I live in a part of the country where there's rampant materialism, like a lot of other areas. And it used to seem impressive if someone had a certain kind of house, or a certain kind of car, or a certain kind of job. And now it's just noise. To me, it's like, that doesn't impress me. What impresses me is someone who maybe is going to volunteer time to build a philanthropic organization that's going to help people, or someone who volunteers their time for working with individuals who, have less than you do, or donating money if you're not able to travel. Right now, none of us seem to be able to travel. If you can't travel to a part of the world where you wanted to volunteer time. And so time in many levels now has become a kind of a indicator of, in my mind, of the degree of success. So can you devote time to things that are really important to you, that really maintain your key priorities? So success has shifted throughout my lifetime, and I think as people mature, and it has nothing to do with age. I'm sure I met a 16-year-old doing a TED Talk event last week, who I was stunned. I was like, she was wiser than some people my own age. So it has nothing to do with age. I think that it really has more to do with wisdom and maturity. And, are you taking in and processing the information that you exist within on a daily basis, and doing something positive with it?
Yeah, I love that. And not to harp on, wearing masks in the pandemic, but it's a great reminder of, are you wearing a mask in your life? And we have time to
Hmm.
reflect on that more than ever. So it's a great time to check in and see if you are being authentic and living to your terms of success and figuring out
Hmm.
what that means for you. What also came up for me as you were describing your definition of success is it sounds it's based a lot on intimacy and
Mm-hmm.
connection with people that you care about the most.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people are coming to the same definition in many ways,
Mm-hmm.
especially with COVID and being sheltered in place. They're realizing that that connection is really important and becoming more
Mm-hmm.
clear on who they want to stay connected to.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to me, last year I had a healthcare hiccup, a 13-day hospitalization where I almost died. And last year was a very pivotal year for me on so many levels, because I realized I needed to create bigger boundaries. And there are people in my life who will always be a part of my life, but I don't necessarily derive a lot of joy when I have to be around them. And so 2020 it's another layer of that, creating boundaries, making sure that my energy is protected, making sure that if I'm spending time with someone, if it's someone that drains me like an energy vampire, and there are many of those, that I really do it on my own terms. It may not be what makes them happy, but it's not about them. So really, really important to investigate those relationships and, create boundaries. If it's not someone you can not have in your life anymore, then, creating ways that you can be around them on your own terms.
Yeah, and I think that today more than ever, tapping into our own energy and being able to protect our energy is so important because there's a lot of anger and fear in the world. And
Hmm.
it's easy to even just go on a walk and
Yeah,
feel that toxicity from other people. So definitely go within and make sure you're
hmm,
ramping up your own energy and paying attention to where you need those boundaries. I love that.
absolutely.
Yeah. So we all know that there are challenges and obstacles, and we talked a little bit about adversity already. But
Hmm.
what were some of your biggest challenges or obstacles on the way to success?
Mm. Well, I think, retrospectively, looking back 4 years, I think for me, a lot of the challenges were things I just didn't know enough about. So I'm a medical provider. I didn't have an MBA. I had no formal business training. And so I had no idea what a niche was. I had no idea. Actually, I built a website before I even knew what my niche was, which gives you some sense of how I had everything backwards. I think I really had no sense of how to market. I had zero idea of how to be savvy on social media. So if anyone ever sees any of like my really old videos, they're terrible. I mean, let's be honest. I get an A for effort, but they really weren't very effective. And so I think for me, the challenges were more situational. They were more related to business management, but I was smart enough to recognize that I needed to have really good mentoring and it was worth to make that investment. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have that scarcity mindset. They're like, oh my God, I can't invest in a business coach. I can't invest in training. Well, I had no problems doing those things. I recognized that I needed support and help. And it took a couple iterations of business coaches to find a great one. And then I joined a mastermind group. And so I think a lot of the things that I learned up front, the challenges I had up front, were really more informational. It was not a lack of, I'm someone that doesn't lack confidence. I'm someone that doesn't lack hard work and ethics or effort for that matter. So very hardworking. I think my challenges were predominantly just situational. And now that I've got all those skills, I found it much, much easier to kind of navigate being an entrepreneur. And I think one of the other really critical pieces is that you need to be surrounded by other like-minded individuals, like other entrepreneurs. They don't have to be doing the same thing you're doing, but the only people that really understood what I was going through, my husband works for a large company. He's an employee. And sometimes I would have conversations and I would say, well, I'm a little less risk averse, just my personality. And so things that I did, he would never in a million years have ever done, which is good because we balance each other out. But I think most of the challenges were situational and informational. And now now it's other challenges. There will always be challenges. It's, your response to them. And, how do you think methodically? Like one of the things that has translated really well into being an entrepreneur for me is that I always worked in very critically or acute care areas. So ER medicine, cardiology. So I was very calm under pressure, which I continue to be. I have, it's very easy for me to very methodically think, okay, these are the 5 things that need to be prioritized right now. Bing, 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 bing. And so I can do that. And it allows me to have a sense of calm when I need it. And it also allows me to kind of filter out the noise. Like when I absolutely positively am feeling overwhelmed, it's like, okay, I have to have tunnel vision, just focus on the next three things, just focus on the next two things. And that has been hugely beneficial. There's definitely been skills that have translated really nicely, and that's been several of them.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of entrepreneurs are resistant or afraid to invest in a mentor or a business coach,
Mhm.
but you accelerate so much faster,
Oh, totally.
so much faster, and it's just so much less overwhelming
Mhm.
when you do that. And it is equally important to have that, like you described, the community of other
Mhm.
entrepreneurs, because if the majority of the people that are you're friends with or that are in your tribe are really just working in corporate America, which I would say a lot of mine were before I dove into
Mhm.
entrepreneurship, they don't understand. It's like
No.
speaking a completely different language. And
Yes.
when you hit a wall, they're like, "Oh, are you just going to get a new job?" And it's like, no, that would be like giving away my own child.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I find for me when I'm out socially, I mean, obviously there hasn't been a lot of social anything for the last 5 months, but when I've been out socially and for me, it's so nice to not have to talk business when I'm out. Like I appreciate that our really close friends, they're always taking interest in what I'm doing. Like, where are you traveling? Where have you been? What are you doing right now? But the focus is so not on my work that for me, it just allows me to really have an opportunity to just be who I am and not be defined by the latest, greatest thing I've done. And that there's a lot of solace in that. I think last year when I got so sick and then had my biggest year of business I'd ever had, it was just like an acceleration. And I remember saying like the people I wanted to hang out with were my friends from childhood because they had known me my entire life and they loved me for who I was. They weren't loving me because of whatever had just happened. They genuinely were interested in what was going on in my life. And so I felt like, here's the irony. I felt like I pulled my close circle of friends even tighter. And then 2020 happened and, pulled them in even more. And so it just demonstrates that you have the ability to evolve, shift and change, even when, life, there's a little bit of adversity like it has for all of us. There's no one that's listening or watching this that hasn't had a year that's been quite interesting, to say the very least.
That is so true. We are in it together in one way or
Mhm.
another, regardless of how you feel.
Yeah.
Um, so, what is a story of inspiration that you are known for?
Hmm. Well, so I've done two TED Talks, and the first one, I flew up to Toronto, and that was great. And at the time that I accepted that first TED Talk, I was offered a second. And the backstory about that second TED Talk was I had returned from a business trip with my husband. And 2 days later, I was fighting for my life in a hospital. I spent 13 days in the hospital and almost died. And the things that I thought about while I was in the hospital, when I wasn't completely unaware of what was going on, number one was my family and getting home to them. Number two was I still wanted to do this talk. And I remember my surgeon probably thought, well, she told me afterwards, she thought I was crazy, but she just kept humoring me and said, okay, we'll see. We'll see. So 27 days after I left the hospital, 13-day hospitalization, lost 15 pounds. I had a ruptured appendix. I had a slew of drains coming out of my body. I hadn't even had my appendix removed because I had been so sick. I did my second TED Talk. And so for me, I did that second TED Talk because I felt the information was really important to share, but also to demonstrate to my children how important mindset was. I mean, I was so weak. Still, I'd only been out of the hospital for maybe 2 weeks when I started practicing my talk and trying to memorize it. But the whole reason why I did the talk was to prove to them that mindset is everything. I had no idea that that talk would then go viral. And so I think people sometimes are surprised that I was able to bring that in to manifest it. But what I remind people, I never did a talk to see if it would go viral. I always did TED Talks because I'm an introvert. And the thought of getting up in front of a room of people I don't know was a little scary. And so, I think that's probably the most recent, inspiring story. I think a lot of people see the talk and then they end up in, following me on social media, which is always awesome, or they share incredible stories about how intermittent fasting has changed their life. But when they hear the rest of it, they're like, wow, that's powerful. And so I tell my kids all the time, the only thing that limits us is our mind. So I think that's the kind of inspiring thing I want to leave your listeners and viewers with is that, our mind is our most powerful asset. And so irrespective of what's happened to our bodies, making sure our mind is still clear and working well is one of the most important things that we can do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think also it's just reminding ourselves as we experience difficult situations or strong emotions,
Mm-hmm.
that too shall pass. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that you stuck to your guns on the talk and made it happen regardless
Mm-hmm.
of the adversity you're facing. That shows a lot of courage and
Mm-hmm.
conviction.
Yep. Well, my surgeon, when I went to see her after, so I think it was probably like 10 days after that talk, I had my appendix out. And then a couple weeks later, I was sitting in her office talking to her, and she saved my life. And so I was very grateful and was a little bit emotional, which is not my norm. And she just kept saying, I have to tell you, she was like, every time you brought up the fact you wanted to do this talk, I just held my breath because I wasn't sure you're going to physically be able to do it. But she said, I'm so impressed and excited. And my gosh, if you were the average 40 something and that had happened to you, I'm not sure you would have been out of the hospital as quickly as you had been. So I always like to say that intermittent fasting was something that kept my body really healthy despite being middle-aged. And it also was something that has helped inspire so many other people. And that's really, when you talk about like making an impact, and I always say that, your voice, having the opportunity to speak to many, many people can impact more lives than just being in a clinic or being in a hospital working as a healthcare provider, which is not demeaning those wonderful healthcare providers, because obviously if we didn't have those, it would be a whole separate situation. But just for myself, I knew that I was meant to reach more people than just those I physically was taking care of.
Well, and I love that even though you just said that you're introverted, that you didn't allow that to get in the way
Mhm.
of sharing your passion and
Right.
sharing that message.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So you described yourself as primarily a movement leader. So
Mhm.
I'd love for you to tell us about a movement that you've built.
Mm. Well, I think unknowingly, when I left clinical medicine, I am still a middle-aged woman, but I was getting tired of hearing a lot of limiting beliefs, a lot of naysayers, a lot of, 25-year-old fit pros trying to tell women my own age that they, shaming them or making them feel badly because, let's be honest, the playing field changes in our 40s, and certainly and beyond. And so the movement that I believe that I'm creating or have created is, a lot of the dispelling a lot of dogma, but also encouraging women to not buy into limiting beliefs about aging, that you have to gain weight, that you have to have less energy, that you have to have poor quality sleep, that you have to feel less than. There isn't enough emphasis on women at middle age and beyond. And if you think about it, the most women, if they live long enough, they're going to spend 40% of their lifetime in menopause, when they're no longer getting their periods or cycling. And I just think there aren't enough people out there talking about this. And certainly, 5 years ago when I hit perimenopause like a wall, I remember saying, I was like, I went to one of the best research institutions in the country. I mean, arguably one of the best medical schools in the world. And I'm like, I never learned about this. No one ever talked to me about this. So if that's me, imagine like the average woman. And so I want people to feel comfortable talking about things that make them uncomfortable. I want women to have an open forum where they can discuss, what's going on in their lives, and to do so without judgment or fear. Or, we have, women from all over the world that have joined programs and are part of social media groups. And so for me, I think there's an unanswered, unsupported market of women that need the support that they deserve to have. I think for a lot of women, they've just had to go about quietly accepting that they no longer sleep, and, they have no libido, and they just feel less than. And that to me isn't acceptable. I think every stage of a woman's life is important, even if maybe middle age and beyond is not as, sexy, based on marketing and advertising, data, because we're such a aesthetics driven culture. But I cry BS. I think it's a whole hell of a lot harder to look and feel great as you get older. It's so easy. It really is easy in many ways when you're younger. And I just say that from both a clinical standpoint as well as I used to be a younger person than I am today. but I just think that there's a huge void for women. And I love knowing that I'm perceived to be, someone that's, a disruptor. I'm kind of shaking things up. I play well with others, though. I enjoy having a mindset of abundance. There are a lot of, men and women that are doing a lot for this age range that I'm referring to, and doing so proactively, so people don't have to suffer in silence. That's what I really struggled with. I didn't want to share my story when I did my first TED Talk about perimenopause, because I found it embarrassing. But then people watch it and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you spoke to me. And so I'm like, okay, then it was worth it. As much as the introvert didn't want to get up on a stage and talk about all those private things, it's inspired other people to make positive changes. So definitely well worth it.
Well, and I think what's interesting about that age range of, late 30s, early 40s is this is typically when a lot of people start their businesses because they have
Mm-hmm.
more experience, or they become a CEO in their career. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when you need the most energy
Yep.
and you need that vitality. And so the fact that there's not a lot of information on how
Mm-hmm.
to navigate that time in your life for women, it makes it even more difficult for us to
Yeah.
succeed in those roles.
Absolutely. And I think, women that have children that are younger, they'll say, oh my gosh, how do you manage with, kids? And I'm like, well, when my kids were 5 years of age and younger, I would not have been able to do this. And even when they were probably predominantly elementary school age, but by the time I was kind of making this transition, my kids were in the latter part of elementary school, and my husband has always been 100% supportive. And certainly my mom has, stepped in episodically to help, when we've needed to go places. But I think that the sandwich generation, which is where I am, I've got aging parents and I've got, tweens and teenage kiddos. My kids afford me the opportunity to be a little less hands-on. I mean, we are very actively involved in their lives. Let me be very clear about that. But I don't necessarily have to make every meal. I don't have to bathe them anymore. I don't have to wipe their bottoms. I don't have to make their beds. I mean, there's a lot that they can do independently. And because of that, it gives me the time to be able to invest in the business. But, one of the things that I think is really critical to mention is that you have to have, again, the boundaries piece, like making sure that my clients understand that, and that I shut everything down at dinner time. I really endeavor. I mean, I try not to work more than 1 or 2 nights per week. And oftentimes now I will pull my husband in so that we can do it together and we get it done faster. But, demonstrating for my children that I'm not going to work 24/7, because that's not sending the right message. I think, ensuring that your family and your loved ones know that there's balance in your life is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so, so important.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you wouldn't be living that life of success
Right.
either. Yeah.
Right.
So, what are some of the pillars to building a movement that catches fire?
Mm. I think you have to know what your niche's pain points are, and you have to be honest, not what you think they are, what they perceive they are. So really listening, doing the research, speaking to people, and finding out like what are their greatest concerns, and building um, either building programs or offering up content that supports their needs. I think that you have to do this authentically. There are people on social media, I'm not going to call this person out in particular, but they preach one thing and then on the other side they're it's very incongruent. And so I think that you have to really figure out what their pain points are and offer up services they're going to be able to support those pain points. But you need to do it with ethics and integrity, and I believe that's really important. But I think it's also, living by example. Like if I was sitting back eating, Hostess fruit pies and like ho-hos and a bunch of junk and sitting on my butt all day long, and I didn't live authentically what I was embracing, then that wouldn't resonate either. So I think it's, creating opportunities to be able to support people's needs. And even if it's not what they perceive they need, creating it too, and then creating content around that, and just really being very clear about, what you stand for. And let's be honest, I can't run my business by myself. So hiring really talented people who have the same kind of business ethos to help support your vision and pay them well. like, here's something that drives me crazy. And I just have to say this because it's fresh on my mind. A lot of times people want to hire the cheapest person to do the job. And I'm sure there are probably people out there who undervalue their skills and don't charge enough. But part of valuing yourself is charging what you're worth. And I'd like to think I pay my team really well. And because of that, like when we have launches and we do things, I like to reward them. I want them to know like my success is their success. We're all in this together. I mean, it's not me. I don't just sit back and make all this stuff happen by myself. Let's be very clear. So it's not just that, it's also creating a team that can support the vision. I mean, it's multi-layers that allow you to, create a movement and to be able to do it with integrity and with great value.
Yeah, and I want to narrow in on the first point that you made around discovering the pain points of your niche,
Mm-hmm.
providing a solution to help them and content to help them. But also, a lot of people miss that little third point that's super important, and that's to be authentic and to
Mm-hmm.
walk the talk of what you're teaching. Because if not, people can tell that.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
your
No one likes
conversions will
perfect.
be lower and
Yep.
people won't relate to you and you won't be of service to your niche. And I think this is just really important because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of entrepreneurs fail in the early days because they're either not listening to the pain points in
Mm-hmm.
their ideal clients' words or don't understand them fully. They're
Mm-hmm.
not providing a solution. But I think it's actually the third part where they're
Mm-hmm.
not being authentic and they're
Yep.
not actually walking the talk of what they're teaching.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. There was a little bit of a brouhaha on Instagram the other day, and I was asked by many people what I thought of what was going on with this other person and this move in this other group. And so I just kept encouraging people. I was like, I'm not going to publicly share my opinion on this, but what I encourage people to do is this and this and this. And I think the reason why this particular entrepreneur is taking a lot of heat is due to the fact that they are not authentic. And in this culture right now where a lot of people are suffering financially, emotionally, physically, this person keeps boasting about they bought a bigger house, they bought a bigger car, they bought this expensive bag, they bought this, they bought that. It's all this rampant materialism. And I actually was saying to my husband that, we've done a lot of like decorating stuff in the house. And I said, somehow like decorating stuff in the house is very different than, boasting about those kinds of things. But, being sensitive to your audience, like now is not the time to be bragging about your multi-million-dollar home. And it's not the time to be bragging about, this outrageous closet you have. And it's not to suggest that, if someone has earned those things, I mean, that's awesome. Good for you. But it's not authentic to the kind of persona that you're trying to create. At least it isn't in my world. I think most health and wellness professionals, I don't want to see someone's yacht. I don't want to see someone's big house. It's like, demonstrate to me that you are providing value to your tribe or your niche. That I can respect. But, blatant materialism, that's just noise. I mentioned earlier, it's just noise. And so this individual got into a little bit of hot water. And so I was privately responding to people when they were trying to ask me if what my opinions were. I just said, I'll do a voice text, which disappears. But I'm not going to, I don't even want to, just energetically, it's not, I know this person personally, and I'm just like, I don't want to go there. It's not really it's not my place. And energetically, it's not a good match for me to continue to feed into that.
Yeah, that's an important point is,
Mm-hmm.
you need to be sensitive to
Mm-hmm.
what's happening in the world and what your clients are experiencing and your followers are experiencing
Absolutely.
and not being tone deaf, right?
Yeah.
And so even if your business is doing great, there's a way to share that success that's not going to offend or
Right.
create comparison and
Mm-hmm.
despair amongst the people that are following you.
Yep.
There's a way to show that you're being of service versus boasting. Like that's
Correct.
where the ego gets in the way, and that's not
Right.
something that anybody wants to hear.
No. And it's interesting, Twitter is one of my favorite social media platforms. And the other day, I don't talk a lot about my business on Twitter. I don't talk a lot. I mean, I talk about my business in the context of who I serve, but not, financial stuff. And so, the entrepreneurial side of Twitter was, people were talking about what they were doing. And I was like, my husband and I just applied for 5 trademarks. Our app is almost finished. And then I forget what the third thing was. But people were like, oh, I had no idea. That's so cool. Oh, sweat supplements. So we white labeled some supplements, and how they sold out, like one whole series, one whole line sold out in 24 hours, and how excited I was. But that's very different than someone saying, oh, I had a 6-figure launch, or I had a this, or I had a that. It's almost like a tone deaf thing. Or as you mentioned, that ego is never a good thing to be a sense of motivation. Ego is always what puts us in a position where we're not authentically connecting with who we are. It was interesting. Yesterday, I was talking to someone, and they said, they gave me I'm doing an event in November. And so they gave me the option of being on a panel or speaking by myself. And I opted to speak by myself. And I said, panels, as an example, are generally either really good or really bad. And it depends on the moderator. It depends on, is everyone playing nicely on the panel, or do you have someone that, tries to hog all the attention? And this individual was saying, yes, sometimes we have the ego driven people, and it can really be a problem. It's almost like a freight train. Sometimes you can't get them to stop talking. And so if you're one of those people and you're wondering if you might be ego driven, you may need to check yourself, because generally those people, if they think to themselves, is this the primary way I want to communicate my message? They probably wouldn't want to be perceived that way.
Yeah. And before you post anything, you should ask yourself 2 questions. 1, is this about me or my
Mm-hmm.
audience? And 2, is it going to inspire or bring
Mm-hmm.
down my
Yep.
audience? Yeah.
Love it. Perfect.
So,
Such a simple message.
yeah. How do you gain trust, support, and buy-in for your movement?
Mm. Well, I think it starts with just being, as we've talked about, being authentic, being honest, um, showing up. If you say you're going to show up and do a video, show up. If you're going to create content, create content. If you're going to create a podcast, a blog, a video, you do it. And I think it's, for me, I think I've cultivated a following because I've never tried to be someone different than who I am. And so, I'm quietly unassuming. And I think people are looking for, they don't want more pressure. They don't want to be pitched to. They don't want salesiness, which is not the way I always say. I come from a place of education. That's an inspiration. That's kind of where that's who I am as an individual. And that's conveyed in my videos. So, for anyone who might be watching and is kind of looking, first you got to define your niche, and then you need to go where they are, and then you need to offer value. I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned, is that consistently offering value, not looking to pitch like I'm pitching something that you have to pay for, or I'm pitching something you have to buy into. I would say 90% of the time I'm not pitching stuff. I'm just saying, this is a free resource, or, go to the podcast. This is free, or, go to this resource. And then every once in a while I'll say, listen, I've been referring other people for years to get electrolytes while they're fasting, but now I actually have a product. So now I will pitch it. And because people know that I'm not salesy, I can do that. And when I say I sold out in 24 hours, they understand that it's legit. But I think a lot of it's a lot of foundational work. For anyone who thinks they can just jump in there and people are going to like, know, and trust them, that's not typically how it works. In fact, I think the statistics I've seen is that it takes anywhere from 0 to 90 days for a lot of people to buy into even like a small ticket item. But bigger ticket items, it could take people up to a year. So you're warming them up. You're always warming them up. And so that's why it's so critical that you are creating content that serves your community, and serves them authentically, and serves them with integrity. And like I said, if you say you're going to do something, you do it. So if I say I'm coming on live, like I have paid groups that are on social media. And if I say to them, okay, on Friday, I'm going to come on and do X, I come on and do X. And if for some reason there was a catastrophic disaster and I couldn't do it, I would explain why. So I think showing up and, just providing service, that's 90% of the 90, and I don't want to use the term game, but that's 90% of creating that community is, and you want people, the term is sticky. You want people to be sticky. You want to have them keep coming back. So you don't want to keep pitching to them. You don't want them to feel like they're being sold to. You want to offer up value. And occasionally, if 10% of the time you're offering up something that they can buy, that's great. If you want to refer them to your website where they can pick things up, that's great too. But that's just not, my business ethos is not to have people feel like they're being pitched to. That's not authentic to who I am. And, I think that can get people into trouble if they feel like they're constantly being sold to. If every time there's an infomercial or there's a webinar or there's a video, there's something at the end that people want them to buy, they're going to say, I'm just going to tune that out. That's
Yeah.
not what I don't want to be sold to.
Yeah. Well, and it's a good reminder, especially right now, if you don't want to be tone deaf, you need to even back that off even more.
Mhm.
So if you were pitching more before, you need to back that off and offer
Yeah.
even more value because of where the state of affairs
Mhm.
are in the world. And I agree, it takes a longer timeline than people think.
Mhm.
And I think with service industries, especially when they're more expensive, it can take
Mhm.
more than a year. Like that's
Yeah.
the
Oh,
reality.
absolutely.
It takes
Yeah.
a long time.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's only now that every time so normally I'd be doing a lot of public speaking and a lot less one-on-one work. But given the fact my speaking schedule just went from like full months to, only a couple things left in the year, for that reason, I started, opening up my one-on-one spots again. And I told my team, I said, as soon as we get, X number of people at this price, we increase it because my time gets so constrained. One-on-ones are very labor intensive. I love doing them because that's where you get like incredible work done. But, in response to what happened with COVID, we created a program at a price point we had never done before. And it's done better than anything we've ever sold because people are like, okay, for that amount of money, I'm willing to try that out. I don't have to warm up to you for months on end. I'm willing to jump right in. And
Yeah.
so it's really being responsive to what's going on in the world, getting a sense of what people's needs are. You always have to use that as a barometer. It's really, really important.
Well, and having, if you're for the thing, the 10% you are upselling, having a low ticket offering
Mm-hmm.
where you have a ton of value, helps you build that trust so that they
Mm-hmm.
do want to go to that next level of
Yeah.
service where it is more
Mm-hmm.
expensive, but your low ticket offers have to be really solid
Yep.
and over the top in
Yep.
value to build
Yep.
that trust continuously because you
Yep.
want to keep the same clients. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. My team asked me, each time we teach this master class, we give more value. And so we are always looking to improve upon it. And one of them that was newer on the team said, oh, you're doing a lot for this group. And I said, absolutely. I want them to talk about this program as being like the best investment they've made all year and tell their friends and tell more people. And that's how you can impact more lives. I said, you don't want to undervalue just because it's not a higher ticket value. That doesn't mean that you give them less. In my mind, you give them more, you over deliver. You always want to over deliver in a way that, people really can respond and do well with.
Yeah, I agree. Over deliver without overwhelming.
Correct.
So it's great to have a lot of information, but curated,
Mm-hmm.
just in time information within whatever program you have.
Yep.
It's interesting. A lot of people, when they build programs and they want to over deliver,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they overdo the content,
Yep.
and people are so cluttered with information that we need to narrow that and create that
Yep.
very clear roadmap.
I have
Yeah.
learned that the hard way.
Haven't we all?
Yes.
So we're running short on time, so we're going to dive right into the lightning round questions.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your favorite book?
Well, I think the book that changed my life was The Unhealthy Truth by Robin O'Brien, if you're familiar with it or not. But it's really an expose on her background in the lobbying industry and the impact on food here in the United States. Robin O'Brien's youngest daughter developed a bunch of food allergies, and that caused her to do a deep dive into the food industry. And that book for me was life changing and made me so angry. Like I tell people all the time, I'm like, I could only read a chapter at a time, but it changed my life in a beneficial way. And so I like to always tell her that every opportunity I get on social media, I'm like, this book changed my life. And it's a book I highly recommend.
Great. What networking or community group do you love most?
Probably my mastermind community. It was the largest financial investment I'd ever made in my business, which was terrifying. However, it has proven over the last year to be the best investment I could have ever made. Not only is it full of what I perceive to be some of the most incredible human beings I've ever met in my entire life, but it's such a heart-centered group, and there's so much value in what I have learned there that it's priceless, like truly priceless. And given what's gone on in the world with COVID, Usually we get together in groups throughout the year. And so that hasn't happened. We've been doing everything virtually, but much like I said to you, over delivering, the two individuals that oversee our mastermind have just gone above and beyond anything like we could have ever asked or needed. So definitely that group.
Love it. What's the best piece of advice you could share with others today?
Well, don't be afraid to question conventional dogma. I think I've built a business on that. And if I had been fearful, or if I'd come from a place of fear, I wouldn't have taken that leap. So if there's something you're really interested in learning more about or doing, do it. Carpe diem. Life is short. This year has proven to every single one of us that we are stronger than we realize. And I would just encourage you, if you have a desire to be an entrepreneur, you have a desire to go back to school, you have a desire to learn a new skill, do it. Or you want to move. I know you and I are both talking about that. Don't be afraid. Don't let fear be the reason why you don't follow your heart.
Yeah, don't let fear get in the way. And what's the legacy you wish to leave behind?
Well, probably for my kids. I think that's the most important legacy. Demonstrating, both through my husband and I, that, you can live a life of curiosity, and you can live a life authentically and with passion, but also with integrity, honesty, and truth. I know I have a really incredible, home life for my kids and with my husband. And so my greatest blessing and joy is being a mom. And so the business side of things is obviously very important, but I think for them, they're very proud of that. They're like, Mom really created something. It's this whole creative side that I didn't know I had. But ultimately, the most important thing, everything comes back to family. So I would say my legacy is my family.
I love that. All right. So this has been a wonderful interview. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For our listeners, we have a free gift for you. It's her anti-inflammatory recipe book. And the link for that is https://cynthiathurlow.com/thank you. That will be in the show notes too. Anything you want to share about that, Cynthia?
Yeah, I mean, people don't think of it as being a super sexy topic, but as I mentioned at the very beginning, it all starts with food. And sometimes removing inflammatory foods from our diet allows our bodies to have a little bit of time to figure out what's working and what is not working. And certainly if you're perimenopause, late 30s, early 40s or older, anti-inflammatory foods are the ones that you really want to gravitate towards. So we created this cookbook really as a labor of love, so that it might inspire you to, make some changes in your diet that could be profoundly beneficial. So I hope that you enjoy it.
And I think everybody could benefit from this, men and women, especially with how much processed foods that we have. So
oh my gosh,
everybody
totally.
Check it out, guys, too.
Awesome.
She also is the host of the Everyday Wellness podcast. I'll have that link in the show notes if you want to check that out as well as her website and social media links. So this has been a great interview. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
All right. To our listeners, I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you for joining the show today. I hope you were inspired. More importantly, I hope you take action. What is one thing you can do in this moment that will inspire someone? Without action, nothing changes. Be the change you wish to see in the world. If this show truly inspired you, we ask that you share it through your network. Help us spread the light and inspiration in the world. I look forward to seeing you here next week.